Inside the Sixers, of course, they win again last night, 5 in a row. And I know people are getting fatigued from this regular season, but these games are important. These final 7 matter. So you can't bail on them yet. They need these final 7. And we'll see what MKB thinks about these final 7. How many are they going to need to win down the stretch they come? Tomorrow night, they'll play Houston. And Michael Kaskey-Blomain, CBS Sports, joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as the Sixers get another win last night. Let me ask you this, MKB. The last 2 games have kind of been ugly against 2 less, inferior opponents, obviously, short-handed teams. Are you concerned watching what you've seen against those 2 inferior teams the last 2 nights?
Not in a long-term sense, Mike. I think, just like you said on the lead-in there's a lot of fatigue at this point in the season, both for fans, like you said, they're excited for the playoffs, and that goes for players too. I think it's only natural at this point in the season with, one eye on the playoffs at this point already. And after such, it's been a long season, back-to-backs. I think that it's just that, the Sixers are the same way. They have a couple of road games against inferior teams. Like you said, both the teams were shorthanded. And quite frankly, I think it's just a matter of they kind of, I don't want to say overlooked those teams, but just went into those games expecting that they would be able to dominate and pull out a win. And both times they got off to a quick start and then, ended up having to go down to the wire. I think the positive thing is that they ended up pulling out wins in both of them. It seems like a situation where, the past couple of years, if that happened, they were both road games, and we know how much they've struggled on the road in the past. And B, them giving up big leads is something we've seen over previous years, but those times they wouldn't be able to come back or hold off the team and pull out the win. So overall, I don't think it's a major concern. Obviously, it's a short-term concern for Doc. He wants to make sure that he keeps, his guys with their eyes on the prize. But overall, I don't think it's something to, worry too much about heading into the playoffs.
Obviously, as you just said, we're down the stretch, and a lot of people are like kind of fatigued by this season. But games are important. How many of these final 7? They've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You're right, 7. How many of these final 7? Like, they've won 5 in a row. How many are they going to have to finish out here to get that number 1 seed?
I think they can maybe afford to drop 1 or 2 more at most, Mike. They obviously have the tiebreaker with the Nets, and they have, 1 full game on them in the standings right now. The Nets have obviously a little bit tougher of a route. They got the Bucks again tonight, and which should be another great game, and a couple other tough ones coming up. I think the Sixers, if they can go 5-2 or ideally 6-1 or obviously 7-0 during that stretch, obviously they'll put themselves in position to get that 1 seed. But as long as I think they go 5-2, 6-1, continue to beat the teams that they should be beating like they have during this 5-game winning streak, I think they'll be fine.
Yeah, I know that that game tonight. Who do you got? Who you root for? If you're a Sixer fan, I saw you tweet the other day. You got to be rooting for the Bucks. Who do you root for tonight?
Yeah, I think it has to be the Bucks again, Mike. They're 3.5 back behind the Sixers at this point compared to just 1 for the Nets. And even though the Bucks do have the tiebreaker over the Sixers, unless the Sixers collapse down the stretch, I think there's enough space there between the Sixers and the Bucks that they could feel comfortable and have a little bit of breathing room. The Nets, though, they're still right there. So to me, I think it's a situation where it's another night where you got to be rooting for the Bucks if you're a Sixers fan.
Yeah, I know that a lot of people should have their eyes on that game, too. If you watch the game on Sunday, let me get your take on that. What did you see from Sunday from the Bucks and the Nets game? The Bucks win that game, and obviously that's a big win for the Bucks. So these 3 teams are obviously the top 3, but those 2 particularly, kind of what did you see from that Bucks-Nets game?
I saw the Nets struggle tremendously on defense, especially trying to stop Giannis, and also even trying to stop Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday. And that's been, the number 1 question about the Nets all season. Now, obviously, in fairness, they were without James Harden. You add him to the mix, at that point, maybe there's enough offense that, the Bucks wouldn't even be able to keep up. But, watching that game, I just saw them stick DeAndre Jordan on Giannis with no help and watch Giannis go for 49, basically do whatever he wanted, every single possession down court. And, as a Sixers fan, you can't help but to think, all right, well, if this is Embiid and it's a similar situation and this is how the Nets plan to defend him, you would think you'd have a shot. There's no one on that team that could guard a guy like Giannis. There's obviously no one that can guard Embiid. And if they're not going to double, if they're not going to, send help or something like that, they're vulnerable, no matter how much talent they have on the offensive end. So I think, if they're still if they're fully healthy, I think the Nets would probably still be considered the favorites to come out of the East. But they're not unbeatable, and I think the Bucks showed kind of a blueprint of a way that a team like the Bucks or the Sixers could potentially go to attack them in a playoff series.
MKB, Michael Kaskey-Blomain, the real Mike KB on Twitter from CBS Sports, covers the Sixers in the NBA. Doc said the other night, our guys know that they didn't play right and got away with one. And, that's kind of been, as you mentioned, last night and tonight. Down the stretch here, they're not going to be challenged all that much, though. So is this good that they're not getting challenged a lot down the stretch, or would you rather see them be challenged a little bit more with some better quality competition heading into the playoffs?
I think it's a good thing, Mike, if only for the fact that it should help them get the 1 seed, because I think, getting that 1 seed is more important than them having a couple, tough games to keep them on their toes heading into the playoffs. To me, getting that 1 seed, especially this season, the way the conference is shaked out, I think that's of utmost importance. You get that, you avoid having to play, potentially both the Nets and the Bucks. You'd only have to play one, and that would be in the conference finals. So, ideally, you'd probably like them to be tested a little bit more, but this will also give them the opportunity to, not only get wins, but hopefully get their starters some rest. That obviously didn't work out over the past couple nights. It looked like in the first half, potentially they would be able to rest some guys in the fourth quarter. Both times they had to bring them back to close out the game. But I think, moving forward over these last 7 games, if they can, take care of business early, and then get out to the lead, and also get, Joel, Ben, Tobias, and those guys some rest without actually having to have them sit games. I think that's kind of a best of both worlds scenario.
Yeah, I know that tomorrow they'll play Houston, who's a wretched team. They struggled with the Pelicans the last time they played them. They'll play them Friday. Then Pistons, Pacers. The one game should be interesting, the Heat. That's the one team they play that looks like a possible playoff team. That's on Thursday night of next week. I want to get your take on Curry, and I feel like we haven't talked about him all season long. He's starting to shoot the ball a lot better.
Yeah.
Feeling more confident, more comfortable, knows his role better. Like what? Because this is the Curry they're going to need.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike, and it's great to see. And I think a lot of it has been, Seth's had a tough season. He's said it, numerous times to media members after the games and the post-game interviews. Yeah, he dealt with an ankle injury for a while, and then the cumulative effects of having COVID hit him pretty hard. He, it took him a while, I think, to get his stamina back and his wind and his, feel like his old self out there. And I think over this past stretch of a couple weeks, he's really starting to, get back to full form, starting to feel close to 100%. At least that's what he's been saying. And you've seen it out there. I mean, when he's on, he's one of the best shooters in the league. He has a really nice two-man game he's developed with Joel. He's taken, he can handle the ball a little bit. He's not a guy that you want to have the ball in his hands all the time, but he's capable of, initiating some offense for them. And I think Doc, has really been able to kind of take advantage of everything he brings, the floor spacing, the shot creation, and the two-man game. And, obviously if he can continue to shoot like this heading into the postseason, that makes the Sixers, infinitely more tough to guard. And same with Danny Green. Both of those guys have been doing their job the past couple nights, knocking down open shots, giving the team, anywhere between 12, 15, 16 points a night. If you get that from both of those guys combined with, the production that you're going to get from Ben, Tobias, and Joel, and then the bench, that's the team is, clicking on all cylinders at that point.
Yeah, I think he's a big key because of the ability to floor space and what he does there. What about now you've seen a bigger sample size of George Hill and how they're using him and how he fits?
Yeah, I think he's going to be a huge piece for the Sixers in the playoffs, Mike. I like how Doc has kind of slowly been ramping his activity up and getting him acclimated to the team without, throwing him in there too much right away. But he just does. He's the steady hand that the Sixers have needed for a long time, especially off that bench unit. He brings, he's almost like an archetype of a player that you want on a team. He's not the guy that's going to go out and hunt for his own shot, but he's capable of knocking down threes. He's capable of initiating the offense, setting up, himself for shots or his guys for shots. And he's a hard-nosed defender for, point guards, shooting guards. I think he's a guy that the Sixers can trust down the stretch of games to get them into their offense, not turn the ball over, to make wise plays. And for that reason, I think he's, potentially going to be the guy that plays the most off the Sixers bench in the playoffs. I think we'll see him as the first guy off the bench a lot, and I think we'll potentially see him in closing lineups or at least playing heavy minutes down the stretch of, a lot of games in the postseason.
Yeah, that'll be interesting because, late in games, Thibault, who obviously defensively with what he brings to the table, he's actually shooting the ball better in recent weeks as well. Hill, Thibault, Embiid, Simmons, Harris, Green, those guys are all pretty nice defensive players. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how he mixes and matches his 5 in the final 4 minutes.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is going to be, depending matchup dependent and then kind of hot hand dependent in terms of not necessarily hot hand in terms of shooting, but just how players have been playing over the course of the game. Doc said the other night, which is kind of what I figured for a while, he doesn't necessarily plan to, trim down the playoff rotation in terms of guys are just going to be completely out of action. Like he's not just going to, sit Korkmaz and say you're not going to play unless someone gets hurt. I think it's really going to be a situation where, he's going to go in with the similar rotation that he's used in the regular season, but the starters are obviously going to see their minutes jump up. And then it's going to be dependent on the situation, who gets where. I mean, Dwight Howard's obviously going to be a big part of that playoff rotation as the backup big. And like we were just talking about, I think George Hill will be the first guard off the bench. And then other than that, I think you'll see, if they need an extra defender to play against a team like the Nets, I think Matisse will get more minutes. If they need, extra floor spacing on a team that's doubling Ben a lot or doubling Joel a lot, maybe we'll see Furkan get more minutes. Doc said that, Maxey is still going to figure into the playoff rotation. Is kind of like the wild card, the guy that you can throw in, and his style of play is different from anybody on the bench. Shake similarly. So I think it's going to be a situation where all these guys are going to play a role in the postseason. It's just going to be a matter of, opportunity and opposition.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain, LeBron James said that whoever came up with this idea for the play-in should be fired. But it's added a little intrigue to these last 2 weeks. It seems that the teams are embracing it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I mean, you don't necessarily blame LeBron for feeling like that, because I don't think at the beginning of the season he ever would have thought that the Lakers would even be, close to having to play for that play-in spot. Similar to what Mark Cuban said a couple weeks ago. At the beginning of the season, he was all for it, and now his Mavericks are down in that 6, 7, 8 area, and he doesn't like the idea. But from a fan perspective, at least, and like you said, from a team perspective, I do think it's really made this last stretch of the regular season, which can sometimes, just really drag on as teams have separated themselves from the pack. I think it's made it a lot more interesting this season. Even a game like last night, you get the Warriors and the Pelicans, with both teams having something to play for. They're going back at it again tonight. They're both still in the conversation. So, from a fan perspective, I'll be interested to see if they keep going with it. But I do think it's worked in terms of, making these late season games the last 2 or 3 weeks a lot more interesting.
Yeah, and I know that in the East, I mean, it's really interesting the way Washington's playing. They've won 8 out of 10. I mean, you've seen them really come on. I would imagine that that's a team that nobody wants to get matched up with in a one-game setting. And then the way it is, I don't mind the play-in. Like, I get that whole thing. I don't like that you're playing to be the 7 seed. You've already earned the 7 seed, being the 7 seed. It should be 8, 9, 10, 11 maybe playing to be the 8 seed. Don't you think?
Yeah, I agree. The 7 seed, especially if you have a couple, if you've built up a nice few-game lead between the 8 or the 9 seed, it does seem a little bit, unfair, I guess, for lack of a better word. And I think it's one of those things where, they'll see how it goes. It's obviously the first year they've used it outside of the bubble. Adam Silver's always been a commissioner that's, down to tweak things or see how things work out. So maybe, obviously, when you have guys like LeBron James, guys like Mark Cuban, Luka Doncic, like big-name stars in the league that are publicly objecting to it, I'm sure it's something that will at least get considered over the offseason. But like you said, to me, there's a lot of teams right in that thick of that Eastern Conference playoff picture. The Heat at 6, the Celtics at 7. The Wizards, the way they've been playing, there could be some tough matchups for the Sixers in that first round, depending on how things shake out.
Well, that play-in right now would be Boston versus Charlotte, Indy versus Washington. The loser of the Boston-Charlotte game would play the winner of the Washington-Pacers game. You could easily see Washington beating the Pacers and then beating Charlotte and becoming the 8 seed, right?
Yeah, absolutely, especially the way they've been playing recently. And then you have a situation where, the Sixers would obviously still be favored, but it's the first time all season the Wizards have really been at full health. Westbrook's been on another level, and that would definitely not be an easy out for the Sixers in the first round.
All right, Michael Kaskey-Blomain, CBS Sports at the Real Mike KB, and he, like all guests, appear via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. He is the Tuesday edition of Inside the Sixers. Next week, when we talk to Michael, they'll be playing the Pacers, and we should have a pretty good indication of what they look like in those standings. But they are currently 1 game up for the number 1 seed over Brooklyn. They do have 1 game at hand over Brooklyn down the stretch here. So Philly 44-21, Brooklyn 43-22, Milwaukee 40-24. So it should be an interesting race for the top spot. All right, MKB, good to see you, man.
You too, Mike. See you next week.
All right, he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. He joins me every Tuesday for Inside the Sixers.